Hello from Tel Aviv. You're watching Israel Update, Israel at War. And with me is Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute and the Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, Mr. Mike Doran. Hello, Mike.
Hello from Washington, Gadi.
We are at the beginning of the third week of this conflict. Two hostages, Natalie and Yehudit Ra'anan, have been released from Hamas captivities, both of them with American passports. We'll touch on that. And by now, the whole media narrative has been turned on its head, and now the Palestinians are the victims and Israel is the aggressor. What else is new? Batya Unger-Sargon has called the press in the West the stenographers of terrorists, and she is right. Hamas can actually count on the media in the West that they will play their role. Hamas can commit whatever atrocities. It can behead babies, dismember children in front of their parents. Then they retreat to the Gaza Strip, hide inside a civilian population. When Israel rightly bombs them, they scream bloody murder, and the whole press corps just repeats it like a choir. And this is why you have us. And that's not because we are so good, it's because they are so
Gadi,
corrupt and bad.
I'm,
We are good, you're saying,
I'm,
Mike.
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I can't let that aggression stand. We are that good.
We are that good, and therefore now you will tell us what we have on the show today.
Okay, so we have four topics. The first of which is going to be, I can't find the right word for it. Let's call it revolution in military affairs. Revolution may be a little too strong, but the Iranians have distributed to their whole network, including Hamas, capabilities, conventional military capabilities that are changing the whole field of battle across the Middle East. And we want to talk about that a little bit. Secondly, we want to talk about the attacks on American targets by Iran. This is something that has increased over the last few days, and we'll talk about the meaning of that. And we're going to have Rob Greenway from the Heritage Institution. He's going to be here to talk with us for a few minutes. And then finally, we're going to end with the report that came out in the New York Times over the weekend that there was a disagreement at the highest levels of the Israeli government between the defense minister Gallant and Prime Minister Netanyahu about whether to open up at the beginning a front against Hezbollah, which the Americans shut down. But first, Gadi, we're going to go to you because you have a report from Sderot where you had a meeting with a family, and you're going to tell us about it.
Yeah, actually, the meeting was in Tel Aviv, a family with Sderot. They're now, I don't know how to call them, refugees from the Western Negev
internally displaced
persons in the Tel Aviv larger metropolitan area, and these are friends of friends. And I went to visit them, and they had the need to share the story, and you listen to the story, and it's not an atrocity. It's not something like from the massacre in Be'eri. We're not talking about burned alive people, but they hid in the mamad. Mike, how do you say mamad? It's the safe room in the house.
The safe room, I think we say.
There are standards for this. In Israel, when you build a new building, there should be one room that's an actual shelter where the walls are thicker, where you have an iron door for the room and for the window. And they were in their mamad in Sderot, and they stayed there for 2 days while the terrorists were running outside with children. They supplied 3 children. They supplied each of the children with a kitchen knife. These children sat in a closet.
2 days?
2 days. 2 days, because
I didn't realize it went on that long in Sderot.
it went on very long, because first of all, they still occupied the police station, but it took them a long time to completely clear the whole area of terrorists, and these terrorists kept coming back and forth, and they heard them just outside the window. So imagine those parents telling their children to hush up and hiding in a closet with kitchen knives in their hands. They wouldn't turn on the air condition because that would indicate there's someone in the house. They didn't want to close the mamad door because the metal lever sounds a click, and they were so close, the terrorists, every once in a while, that they were afraid to be heard. And you listen to these stories as an Israeli, and you think, this sounds, they're using modern terms, but this sounds like the Kishinev pogroms, like the Farhud in 41 in Baghdad, like Anna Frank hiding in Amsterdam. This is a story that Israel was supposed to put behind the Jewish people, and they were shaken. And I was sitting there and thinking, we're back in the helplessness of the diaspora before Zionism. And I think another word is in order, because Zionism did not promise to protect Jews. I'll rephrase it. Zionism didn't promise that Jews will not be attacked. It just promised that when they are attacked, if they die a violent death, God forbid, they would die standing on their feet with a weapon in their hand, not on their knees with a bullet in the back of their head, like so many pictures of the Holocaust we saw. And I think that what happened with this attack is it shook the foundations of what it means to be a Zionist. And I'll say just one more word, Mike, before I let you react, because Israel has changed the status of Jews, not just inside the country. It has changed the status of Jews worldwide, because it turned diaspora into a choice. Any Jew can choose to be an Israeli. And therefore, the feeling that was at the basis of, I teach Zionism, I teach courses on the Zionist idea. And in the end, after I explain everything,
did we ever explain to the world that you are actually a professor at the Hebrew University? Does anyone know that? Well, I hereby announce to our viewers that you are a professor at the Hebrew University, which is, I hate to insult you, but it's the Harvard or the Yale of Israel.
Yeah, the jury will disregard the last remark. So when I explain to students the rationale or the moral justification of Zionism, there's a lot to say there. But in the end, for me, my father was a refugee, not a Holocaust survivor. He was a refugee from Bratislava, and he was on a refugee ship on the way to Israel. And for 4 months, no country let that boy, whose mother has already died, off to any shore, not Roosevelt's America, not Churchill's England, nowhere in the world. So in the end, a Jewish boy with water under his feet is enough of an explanation for us what Zionism is for. And to many Israelis now, the promise of Zionism has failed them. And this has changed the existential condition of Jews in Israel, I think, for a long time to come.
When you say that so the very idea of Zionism, the very concept is being threatened right now, for sure. But when you say that it has changed the sentiment in Israel, do you want to speculate at all about where that's going to go?
I think I can say some things. I can't
because it's really
all the repercussions.
It's really going to be this is a major. I actually think that the October 6th was a 6 or 7, because I get it mixed up with the 73 war.
It's 7 here and it's 6. It's 6 October 6 in 73. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. October 7. Sorry, I'm getting confused. I think October 7, 2023 is going to be an important turning point in world affairs. I think we are fundamentally we don't have to go into this now, but we are fundamentally in a different era as a result of this. And not just Israel, but the United States, the whole world. Forget about that for the moment. It's clearly a watershed for Israel. What do you imagine? It's so big that we're not going to be able to. This is going to reverberate for years. But what do you imagine?
And not only will it reverberate for years in the world, I think it's part of our mission here in this show to try and explain why it is a turning point beyond Israel. But what I think happened in Israel is that the illusion that Zionism is just normalizing a Jewish existence in a European sense, or as my friend Irit Linur put it, the people who dreamed that this would be Sweden in Hebrew, that they will escape the Jewish story, the Jewish history and the Jewish predicament, that turned out to be an illusion. And there were people, Mike, you study this, you wrote on Middle Eastern history, and Israel included. The pioneers, and the generations of Moshe Dayan and Yitzhak Rabin, of the warriors, assumed that Jewish existence would need to be vigilant, that we could not let go of the sword. There's this famous Golda Meir quote that said, when Arabs put down their weapons, there will be peace. When Jews put down their weapons, they will be killed. And we were reminded of that. We have been reeling for a long time from the illusion of Oslo, from the illusion of peace, from the illusion that our neighbors have accepted us. And this illusion fostered what? It fostered the very idea that we can deter Hamas. What was deterrence based on, Mike? It was the whole establishment in Israel said, well, you know, if we give them jobs, if they have a modicum of comfort, they will not risk it from some crazy utopian vision. And apparently they're willing to be killed, and sacrifice their children, because killing Jews is more important than anything else.
All right. Well, on that thought, let's move to the revolution in military affairs. And we have a video to show you that Hamas put out about one of the techniques that it used to overcome the Israelis. And I want to talk to you a little bit about it, Gadi, but let's first show it to the viewers. They're going to see a quadcopter, commercially available drone, dropping an RPG on an Israeli tank. Okay, so there you have it, Gadi. What the Iranians have been doing for the last 5-10 years, even longer, they have been distributing to all of their allies in the region their network of proxies and agents. They've been distributing disruptive military technologies. This is mainly, but not exclusively, missiles, drones, and cruise missiles, which they combine together in the same strike packages, and they can overcome the defenses of any adversary, including Israel and the United States.
How does it work in combination?
Well, because what happens when you put them in, they all have different flight patterns and different flight behavior, and so they can overcome both the sensors and the interceptors of even the most sophisticated systems, including Iron Dome and David Sling and the THAAD that the Americans have, and so on. It is created what in military terms we call an offense dominant regime. What's offense dominant? I can give it to you in very simple terms. I have a pistol, you have a Kevlar vest. I can shoot 6 bullets at you with my pistol. Your Kevlar vest is going to stop 5 of those bullets. That's from a statistical point of view, from the point of view of the builders of the makers and manufacturers of Kevlar vests. That's a fantastic vest. It's going to stop 5 out of 6 bullets. But if I have 6 bullets to shoot at you, that fantastic statistical analysis is wonderful, except if I get a medical analysis, you're dead because one of those bullets got through. That's an offense dominant regime. And when you add to the fact that just to go on with the metaphor, the Kevlar vest is much more expensive than the bullets. You see what we just saw there is a quadcopter in that video. That's a quadcopter that is commercially available. You can buy it at Walmart, and it's dropping a twin charge RPG. One blows a hole in the armor, and the other then blows it up. The American tanks, all tanks, American tanks, Israeli tanks, they are susceptible to vertical attack. They were built originally with the idea in mind that the anti-tank weapons were going to come at them horizontally. So they have good armor on the sides, but not on the top. They can be penetrated on the top. So that's I don't know how much. Is it a $5 million tank? Something like that. Maybe it's 7, 5, whatever. A lot of money. Then you have
these quadcopters, these drones cost nothing.
They cost nothing. Well, they cost nothing. I haven't priced them.
So
but,
so you can basically
$2,000 maybe.
So for say $2,000 and whatever the RPG costs, you can blow up tanks, and you can buy a legion of them.
And think about not just the tank, the cost of the tank itself, but also the crew. The crew then becomes vulnerable, and it takes, how long does it take to train a talented crew? A proficient crew, maybe 2 years. That's a huge cost, investment, but also people. If you can and think about it, how sensitive Israel is to captives. If you can take a tank crew captive, that's also huge political leverage that you have. This is an advantage that the Iranians have given to all of their entire network, and it's an advantage over Israel and an advantage over the United States. We've spent so much time talking in the last 5-7 years about the Iranian nuclear capabilities that we have lost sight about these disruptive conventional capabilities that they have. They're using them in they're relatively unsophisticated weapons, which they're using in very sophisticated ways, and we see the results on October 6th.
And how does this relate or influence the possibility of a ground incursion into Gaza?
Well, it influences on several levels simultaneously. One is the real imbalance between Israel and its adversaries, and Iran is felt in the north with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has all of these capabilities. It has every capability that Iran has that it needs for its circumstances. Iran has some long distance ballistic missiles, which Hezbollah doesn't need because it's focused on its immediate neighborhood. It has all of them, and as I think we mentioned in our earlier programs, this is if Israel goes to war against Hezbollah, this is going to be the worst war Israel's ever fought, because it's going to have more soldiers killed, but more civilians killed. That's going to be you were talking about the threat to Zionism. The threat to Zionism is not just the pogrom that took place at Nahal Oz or Be'eri. It's also the threat to civilians that's coming from Hezbollah now.
And they have 200,000 rockets. You corrected me about the number.
The Israelis are now saying 200,000 rockets and missiles. The number used to be 150,000. They've upped it to 200,000.
And so we can close the circle with your Kevlar vest and pistol metaphor, because we have Iron Dome, but they can overwhelm it. There's no way Iron Dome can protect you from such a barrage.
Iron Dome cannot protect from Hezbollah. Iron Dome was made to protect from the relatively low-tech rockets coming out of Gaza. That's why the Americans have now sent the THAAD missile system to Israel.
but any philosophy of protection, it doesn't matter how efficient your protective umbrella is, it can never be foolproof, and there's always a number that can overwhelm it, and we're way beyond this. And this goes back to the conception. You're you're familiar with the term conceptia, which is used in the not just the study of the Yom Kippur War, but in Israeli discourse about why we failed to anticipate the attack on Yom Kippur on 73. And now the conceptia, the conception, the conceptual framework in which Israel has dug itself in is one of defense and not offense. And this has cost us dearly.
That bingo, that is the issue. That you hear. This is by the way, everything I'm saying about this revolution in military technology, and even the metaphor Kevlar vest and pistol, I have stolen from my Hudson Institute colleague John Kasapoulou, who's a great military analyst. We should have him on sometime. But the academic in me doesn't want to plagiarize him too much. You know, I take all his best lines, but I got to give him a little bit of credit. Kasapoulou always says, and this needs to be drummed into every Israeli now, every American too. This is military science. You cannot, this is basically what you just said in one sentence, you cannot counter an offense-dominant regime with purely defensive measures. The only way you can stop them from attacking you is by threatening them with with offensive measures that will hold at risk something that they hold dear. And that what we are seeing is that Iran will fight Israel to the last Gazan. They have no problem with that, you know. And then they'll throw Lebanese civilians, and the entire world will say Israel is bad. Israel is bad. But the real problem is in Tehran. That's where the real problem is. And Israel's going to have a really hard time, very difficult time, developing offensive countermeasures to hold at risk something that the Iranians really hold dear.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it, that any attempt to hide behind walls is in the end futile. Partially because the enemy can study your routine. I think we talked about that, the Chinese wall, the Maginot Line, the Siegfried Line, the Hitler's Atlantic Fortress, and now Israel's wall.
And I said to you back then, the Bar-Lev Line, for some reason.
Yeah, I always forget the Bar-Lev Line.
Yeah.
That too was a miserable failure. Mike, we're moving on now to direct attack on American forces, and this show focuses on Israel, so we need a word about why we're dealing with this so intensively. It's that because you and I should say, yeah, you and I is the right order, because it's you convinced me a long time ago that the real center of this problem is Iran, and the denial of this fact by the current American administration is the key to understanding all its behavior towards Israel. Everything that Joe Biden did here was an attempt to save his appeasement of Iran from failure and from public criticism, from the danger of blowing up into a regional war in which it would be clear that Iran is the enemy. No, it's to correct me. I see you. I'm not sure everybody saw you do this.
You're a little too categorical there for my taste. I certainly, the way I would put it, I don't want to be too abstract and intellectual or academic about this, but this came up in our last episode. Yes, there's a pathology at the center of American policy. America's been building up Iran and trying to cooperate with it on regional stability, and that policy blew up on October 6th. It blew up. It isn't clear that the Americans understand that it blew up, and the obstacles, even if they understood it, the practical obstacles for them to do something about it, which we'll talk about more in just a second, are huge. Political and military. But I raised my hand in objection when you were talking, is that I don't want to say that all of the restrictions that the Americans have placed on the Israelis are purely in order to save their Iran policy. They could have very prudential, what the Americans are trying to do is they are trying to neck down the front so that it's Israel against Hamas and keep the war from spreading more broadly. Even if they had an effective Iran policy, which I do not believe they have, they still might follow that policy. So I don't want to say that every step that they're taking is the result of their Iran policy, but ultimately, the Israelis have a problem. Like Ben Gurion said, I'm going to fight the white paper like there's no war and fight the war like there's no white paper. The Israelis have to fight America's Iran policy because it's part of the problem. It is part of the problem.
So we disagree on this topic. I guess it's not a qualitative but a quantitative, not a quantitative but a not a qualitative but a quantitative difference, because and the telling sign for me is that Americans are so adamant on denying what is self-evidently true, is the hand of Iran behind this. But Mike, we are behind on time, and we want to move to the direct attacks on American forces by Iran.
Yeah, so we won't go over that. I was going to go over, but Iran's proxies in Iraq have carried out direct attacks on American forces on Thursday, Friday, and on Saturday. They attacked an attack drone, attacked American forces in Iraq. I interviewed Rob Greenway. He was in charge of the Middle East in the Trump White House. He's a career military officer, retired colonel. Spent almost his entire career in the Middle East in special operations. So this is a guy who knows the Middle East from the ground up as a military officer, but has also worked at the highest levels of policy. And I put it to him: how does America establish escalation dominance over the Iranians? Escalation dominance meaning if you're in a fight with an adversary, you throw a punch, he throws a punch. Before you throw your first punch, you think, well, what's he going to do next to me? You know, if I'm fighting a little schoolgirl, I know I have I hope I probably have escalation dominance. If I'm fighting Mike Tyson, I know he has it, right? And so, because meaning as we go up the ladder of increasingly lethal actions, I'm not going to be able to match him. And the Iranians have escalation dominance now at this moment over us and the Israelis. How do we reestablish it?
Despite the larger strength of America. So here's Rob Greenway.
So Rob, you know the Middle East both as a policymaker in the White House, but you also know it as a career military officer who served for decades in the region. If you were in the White House today advising President Biden, what would you tell him the United States needs to do, both in the near term and in the long term, in order to establish escalation dominance over the Iranians?
That's a great question, Mike. The first is you have to understand what went wrong in the first place, and that is a clear miscommunication. Second, you have to account for the fact that this is going to take some time, and this could lead to a lot of different potential contingencies. You've got to be prepared for all of that. So you have to be ready for the end when you begin the process of restoring deterrence. So as a procedural matter, you've got to make sure that the resources are in place. The second, that you communicate clearly what, in fact, the red lines need to be from a U.S. perspective. Third, you've got to demonstrate the will with the capacity present. And in this case, you're going to have to begin to destroy Iranian infrastructure, command and control, and probably leaders that are instrumental in mounting the attacks that the United States has sustained so far. And under those circumstances, we have found successfully over time, and the Israelis have found the same, that you can restore and maintain deterrence.
What if we don't get this right, Rob? For the United States, what are the implications for us?
Well, ultimately, what I think the Iranians have attempted to do is to exhaust Israel in the near term as the only obstacle to them and their objective. And their objective is One, to maintain de facto control over the region's energy resources. And second, I think that they want to conceal the final steps toward potentially the development of their nuclear weapon. And they don't want Israel to be a problem or to be a potential obstacle to that path, knowing the United States won't. What that ultimately means is Iran would control the region under the umbrella of potentially a nuclear weapon, and they would control the world's energy markets, which could push us from global recession into a global depression and leave them in control, which would benefit Russia and would also benefit China, and it would cripple the United States and our allies.
Wow, that's a bleak thought. Okay, Rob, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you back again.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Well, there you have it, Gadi. You know, I couldn't agree with him more that the U.S. position in the region is at risk here, and this is what I think the Israelis have to convince the Americans of, that this is not simply a fight between Hamas and Israel. I hear all these talking heads, you know, all the great minds on the Middle East are saying, what's the answer? Two-state solution. It's a policy from the 1990s. They want to go back in time. They're not dealing with the balance of power as it exists right now.
But I need to explain, Mike, why this is tempting to many minds, and I'm convinced it would be tempting for a section, an increasingly smaller section of the Israeli left. Why is it still tempting to them? Because they thought of the Hamas regime in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria that this is the right wing's policy of divide and rule, and they were in a sense right. So long as this division exists, there can be no advance along the path of the long dead Oslo agreements and the two-state solution. But now they see an opportunity to remove Hamas, reestablish Fatah in Gaza, and then, wow, there you have it again. All the conditions are ripe for a two-state solution. Before you say why not, I'll say something about Israelis. And I think anybody that the left in Israel has long ago given up on convincing Israelis. It loses all elections on questions of international policy, of peace and war. And what this to turn the left to the idea of convincing Americans, or as some human rights activists, pro-Palestinian, often pro-Hamas activists say, I'm thinking of one specific head of a so-called human rights organization. They think that the war between Jews and Arabs in Palestine as they call it, would be won in Washington. So these people count on America forcing our hand, and the international community forcing our hand.
But what we can see now is that segment in Israel was very willing to turn a blind eye to America's and to the Obama and Biden courtship of Iran in order to hitch a ride on the U.S. Promotion of the two-state solution, as you've just explained it. So what I'm trying to say is that the same elements in Washington, that is Obama, Biden, their teams, who want to reach an accommodation with Iran over the entire Middle East and who have been empowering Iran effectively, they are also emphasizing the importance of Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. In fact, it's a tool they use to beat up the Israeli governments, to knock them down, to knock Netanyahu down, so that he couldn't raise the Iran question. I think it's going to get harder and harder for Israelis to turn a blind eye after what happened on October 6th to the American courtship of Iran. I also think it's going to be harder for Americans to turn a blind eye to the courtship of Iran, because, as Rob Greenway points out, this war, properly understood, is not a conflict between Israel and Hamas. It's not a conflict between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah. It's not a conflict between Israel and Iran and its allies. It's a conflict between Iran and the United States over the future order of the Middle East. Let me just point out to you, 2 weeks ago, we were this close to Saudi-Israeli normalization. 2 weeks ago, we were this close to a new page in Turkish-Israeli relations. 2 weeks ago, Israeli-European relations were in a better state than they've been in a very long time. That's all washed away now. All washed away. We have demonstrations on every European street, and we have young people who are not particularly involved in international affairs, not following it closely, who are repeating Hezbollah talking points. I see it in the young people that I talk to here in the United States, and the entire Islamic world and Arab world has moved over to Iran. They are not necessarily to aligning directly with Iran, but they are all pushing what is basically an Iranian agenda. As Batya Ungar Sargon said, the press in the West has become the stenographers of the terrorists. Well, the entire Muslim world is now working on the Iranian agenda, whether they know it, whether they know it or not. This is a huge challenge for the United States. Huge.
I'll just add one point about Israel. While the left is still clinging to this old idea, it will have no traction in the near future, because you in the nice suburbs who vote for the left in Ra'anana or in Kfar Saba or in the nice neighborhood of Jerusalem, anyone that's living close to the green line, the 67 border, will not dream of agreeing to a Palestinian state at their doorstep. So in Judea and Samaria are just too close to everything in Israel, and this attack by Hamas has clearly taken the two-state solution off the table. Joe Biden doesn't understand this, because he said that the results of the war may open the path for a Palestinian state. They've just slammed the door at that possibility.
When I said moving toward the Iranians, I for our viewers, I need to make this clear. Hamas fundamentally rejects the two-state solution. It rejects the existence of Israel. And it rejects it in its statements consistently, and it showed its rejection in those attacks. You don't go and rape somebody's mother as the beginning of a negotiation, right? You don't rip a baby out of a live mother's womb in order to get a little more territory in the West Bank. Those are very clear statements of policy that we want to expunge you. Iran is saying the same thing over and over again. They are saying that the Israel must be wiped from the map. If we think that this movement of some Western opinion and a lot of Middle Eastern opinion in the direction of Iran is creating conditions for a two-state solution on the other side, not on the Israeli side, we're crazy. It feels good to say these things, but they are fundamentally not true. We're not dealing with reality as it actually exists. And on our show here, I think at least 80% of the time we should deal with reality as it actually exists.
And the last part of the reality, which we will deal with today, is a story in the New York Times and also in the Israeli press, which the New York Times story also has an Israeli journalist in it, so you can see they're probably sourced to the same place. And the story is, as you mentioned in the beginning, a disagreement between Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who thinks we should strike at Hezbollah in a preemptive way, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who said we shouldn't. But the story seems to me blown out of proportion, because what happened here is that two American aircraft carriers have basically blocked that possibility for Israel. And you explained very well, I don't know if it was in one of our conversations or on here, why this is in effect a protective umbrella for Hezbollah.
That's true. It can be. Again, it goes back to this. It's not just an academic distinction. I can make an argument for American policy in this way and say, if the Americans actually have a paradigm shift and they realize that they need to establish escalation dominance over Iran,
then they would send their aircraft carriers to the Gulf and not to Israel. They would threaten Iran and not Hezbollah.
the Eisenhower, Gerald Ford is going to Israel, but the Eisenhower is on the way to the Gulf. It is
good news.
And they are bringing forces into the region. So you could imagine. I don't believe that this is exactly what's happening right now, but you could imagine an American strategy that says, let's go one front at a time, take care of Hamas, then take care of Hezbollah, then take care of Iran. And in the meantime, we'll build up our forces. That's a logical. Now, I don't actually believe that's happening. I don't. But I believe that that if we do our job correctly, we can change minds, that the White House could end up there, even though it's not starting there.
So let me suggest an idea about escalation dominance, because Israel's most vital interests are at risk now. The Biden administration is leaving us in the lurch. There's no clear path for us for any clear victory in this conflict, and therefore our blood remains in the water. And this is like an existential danger. What tools does Israel have, and what threats can it use? I'm not recommending any of this. Let's think about it in terms of, game theory. Okay, the one thing that America would dearly want to avoid is being dragged into a war. And Israel knows that this Iran policy is on thin ice. If it comes to an all-out conflict that endangers Israel's existence, American public opinion would not let any administration, even the return of Obama, to just side with Iran. They can't do this. So,
right.
In a sense, in game theory, again, I'm not recommending this policy, but because I think if Israel drags America into a conflict, there would be grave consequences. But it is a possibility. So if Israel drives up the escalation ladder, this can be very, very bad news, not just for this administration, but also for whoever replaces it.
No, look, we need, from my point of view, one needs to be. I was going to say we, you and I, but I want to be a little more understanding of the Biden administration. For all that I am a critic of it. And I'm a very strong critic of it, and I would give its Middle East policy up until October 6th. I would give its Middle East policy an F, because it was empowering Iran. It was doing two things. It was empowering Iran, and it was disaggregating its alliance. So it had denigrated Mohammed bin Salman and forced him. It had taken the Houthis off of the terror list. The Houthis being Iran's proxy against Saudi Arabia, but now also in Yemen, right? And it had denigrated Mohammed bin Salman. It denigrated Benjamin Netanyahu and accused him of being the problem in the Israeli-Palestinian arena and being a problem in general and destroying democracy and so on and so forth. But put distance between the United States and Israel and denigrated him. It had put distance between the United States and Turkey, as we now say. The former Turkey is now Turkey, by supporting the PKK, also known as the YPG, in northeast Syria, and denigrating
the Kurd separatists.
Yeah, terrorist group. PKK is to Turkey what Hamas is to Israel, and the United States is supporting it. So America's alliance system was disaggregated, and each element and each of the core elements were disaffected. Also, I won't go into two, but President Sisi in Egypt also disaffected from Washington, and the attitude of the White House was that they're the problem, not us. The result was that each one of our major allies, each one of America's major allies, stood alone on the battlefield or in the arena against Iran, and had to make its own accommodation with Iran. And the United States was facilitating that in the belief that what it called regional integration, this was going to tamp down tension because it believed that Iran's aspirations were not limitless, that they were actually a defense, that the Iranians were actually a defensive power with whom you could cut a deal.
Yeah.
While the United States was disaggregating its alliance, Iran was aggregating it and directing it toward a specific point. This has to be reversed. It can't be reversed. It can't be reversed in a day. I'm hopeful that as a result of this horrible event, we can start getting people to see this picture. But it's going to take time, and the Israelis are going to have to be very, very careful about how they manage this persuasive effort, because Israel needs the United States desperately right now for many, many things. In the UN, what if the Turks wanted to send a flotilla? The one major Turkish politician, Bahçeli, was talking about sending boats to Gaza. Israel can't stop that. The United States can. The United States has persuasive power there. If Netanyahu alienates Biden over this war, Israel's situation will get worse, not better. So there's no percentage in alienating Biden right now. You have to take what he's giving, use it to maximum effect, and work to persuade him, and work to persuade the American public that what is really at stake here is not Israel and the Palestinians, it's the American position in the region.
Well, I'd like to disagree with this last comment, but we're out of time, so I'll just say one sentence. Israel also has pressure levers through American public opinion, because they can expose the contradictions in Biden's policy that can embarrass him. And
that's our job.
You know that, and you've written about that, and we'll talk about that again and again.
That is our job.
We got carried away, Mike, which is a good thing. It's a good thing, because I hope our viewers would be as interested as we are. But we have to stop here and continue this conversation later this week. So thank you all for watching.